Alrighty, welcome to Esoteric Beat, gentle viewers. I have my good friend here, Cliff Jones Jr., who is a pal from PKD Fest, and I thought we would try something a little different. I feel like I often start a show saying I'll try something a little different. Maybe I need more focus here. So we're going to do our first book reading. Cliff has a work in progress. And now I understand, Cliff, before we get started, and I have some notes that I'm going to just kind of set aside about your project, because I've always thought this project that you're doing is pretty cool. You have a sort of a, what do you want to call it? A literary club called Dream Punk, some kind of a
Yeah,
literary movement.
it's
And
yeah,
I don't want
micro
to
genre
I don't
movement.
want to
Yeah.
put any words in your dream. So I'm going to go ahead and bracket what I've got to say about it and let you talk for a few, and then that's gonna, I'll listen, and that will inform my response. So tell me about Dream Punk.
Okay. So basically, I was when I was first getting into writing, writing fiction seriously, I was using an app called Wattpad, and I don't know that's like I used to use it a lot. I kind of phased it out because they started putting ads in there and stuff, and it just kind of changed everything. But basically, yeah, you could post your stories for free, and I would when I was putting my stories up there, I needed some tags. I needed to figure out how to categorize my stuff. And it wasn't always science fiction, it wasn't always fantasy or horror. It was just kind of like it was always kind of trippy, weird sort of psychological stuff. And so a lot of times that overlapped with different traditional kind of genres, but other times not so much. And one term that I came upon was dream punk, and that was used to sort of describe the sort of stories like Alice in Wonderland, basically, where it's all in the mind. It might be a dream, it might not, and anyway, whether it's a dream or not might not even be important. But it's kind of like trippy mental stuff, and sort of like an offshoot of cyberpunk. But it's not focused on technology necessarily. It's just focused on mental states and that sort of thing. So I was using the term, just tagging my stuff that way. And somebody on the website for Wattpad asked me to write up a description of that genre, because it's like it's a genre that's, the label is being used by some people, but not by a whole lot of people. And I happen to be one of them. And somebody on there asked me for my description of it. So then I really had to think about it. And I kind of wrote up a big article on it and got some examples together and all that. So basically getting tasked with describing the genre made me really look into it and, be like, yeah, this is really something I like. And so then from there, I was contacting other writers, that use the term, that labeled their own stuff as dream punk, and kind of got them together on Wattpad, and just people I found, like Jeb Sherrill was one person I just found on Amazon. His book Storm Dreams was tagged dream punk, and so I was like, I liked it, so I was like, cool. So I got in contact with him just through that, and anyway, he's one of the people that shows up in this collection that I later got going, Mirror Maze. And so it's a collection with like 23 or so authors, and everybody's got at least one short story in this one, and then they're all sort of connected in like a choose your own adventure type format, like a little like a maze, like because it's a there's physically a maze that I charted out to connect all the stories together because I'm really nerdy that way. But anyway, so this was the first big collection. And I by no means invented the genre. Like I said, there was a good handful of other people that were already using the term. Maybe I should call them out here, the ones I think of. So Yelena Calavera is one. I definitely came upon her work pretty early. Let's see. Anyway, I don't want to say names wrong, so I'm real bad with this. But oh well, I'm gonna have to come back to that because Des Schwartz, that was the one I was trying to find. Des Schwartz is another one that was using it real early. And then a few other people like kind of started using it once I was introducing them to it, and I was interviewing them for my website, so doing like Dream Punk author profiles. And so, people like Tessa B. Dick, for example, some of her stuff was like that for sure. Like that her book that was originally titled The Owl in Daylight, and then became what was it? I can't remember what she changed the name to now all of a sudden. But Yeah, it's a real trip. Anyway, that one I definitely thought was dream punk, and so I wanted to interview her on that stuff. But but yeah, basically, it's centered on it could be like an actual literal dream world or some kind of like a drug trip or a mystical experience, or it could be like actually a simulation type thing. So like the Matrix, for example, that works for dream punk. That's like a cyberpunk dream punk overlap because you know, the Matrix, you think of that as cyberpunk, but it's like it's also got a lot of, you know, the Alice in Wonderland type stuff in it, you know, that sort of like just like basically questioning what's real is the major part. It's not like we're in the world and then we enter into this virtual world and that's interesting because it's interesting tech. It's more like, no, we're in the world and we don't know what the world is. You know, what even is it? You know, and that's kind of like more the approach with the Matrix, that where that differs from a lot of cyberpunk, and so that brings it more into dreampunk territory. Um, yeah, so then a while later, I got another one of these collections with even more people in it that some of the people I wasn't able to get the first time. I got into the second one, like Jeff Noon. He was you know he's written a lot of books, Jeff Noon, but he was the creator of Vert, VURT, that series back in the 90s, which is like classic weird. People might classify it as cyberpunk sometimes, but it's really not so much. It's more dreampunk is what it is. And I think he even made up terms to describe what he was writing. One what he called sleep stream, which is kind of like a play off slipstream, but more sleep, you know, to do with dreaming, you know. So he was like real close to the naming that I came up with eventually too, you know. Sleep stream, he said, and also avant pulp was one, you know. So it's sort of like pulp genre kind of stuff, but it's not really following the genre tropes and formats exactly. It's more just like using that to do some different stuff, you know.
So
So
my
yeah.
first thought, um, I had an argument recently with total dickhead David Gill about whether Philip K. Dick can be considered a proto cyberpunk author, right? And what you were saying about the Matrix made me think of Dick's Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, right? Which
Sure.
is a story where, there's people who take this drug and they find themselves kind of in like a little Barbie house. And they actually sort of like mystically project into their Barbie house, But then there's this other new drug that comes in from outer space. And when people take it, they find themselves really mystically projecting into an alternate universe, right? Would you say that that's an example of Philip K. Dick being a proto dream punk author?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's another thing that I didn't even realize what I was doing until I was writing up the description for the genre and everything. And then I kept thinking of examples in Philip K. Dick's work, and I was like, okay. So you know, because I was really inspired to write seriously by Philip K. Dick, but I thought I was doing something different. And then kind of came around, and it's like, okay, I'm doing, you know, the stuff I'm doing has a lot to do with fantasy more than actual science fiction. Usually, not always, but sometimes. But still, it's still got the same kind of thrust of most of the PKD stuff. Like his stuff wasn't always really science fiction either. And even if it was science fiction, like you know, like Three Stigmata, it's not really technology based that much. You know, it's like sure they're going to a different planet and everything, but it's about the drug. And you could say the drug's a technology, but it's more of like a found technology. It's like they find this alien lichen or whatever that they're taking, and so it's not really about like, oh, isn't this high tech stuff really cool? It's more like we're tripping out and exploring our brain space, you know, and that's you know that's what it's about, and that doesn't need technology to tell the story necessarily. You know, it could be like you know caveman era kind of a story, and it's the same thing. They're eating some lichen and they're experiencing all this stuff, you know. It could happen anytime, you know. And so that's kind of what and, you know, if you had a trippy story like that that's like set in prehistoric times, or it's set in a high tech, you know, we're going to different planet times, it's the same type of story, you know. And so that's kind of what I was getting at with the dreampunk label, is like forget about whether it's science fiction or not. It is what it is, you know.
I'm thinking about the ending of Dick's Ubik,
Hmm.
and how critics would complain it kind of doesn't make sense, right? And
Yeah.
his work is, and I think one of the things that we both value about his work, we've had discussions at the fests, along these lines, like what we're looking for in writing. is that it's kind of disobedient to these boundaries of the genre, right? That science fiction is about technology primarily, or that it's about
Yeah,
kind of like rethinking the rules of our society, or telling what if stories. And it's like, Dick's kind of on a different trip. And that's why I study the religious studies kind of side of Philip K. Dick, right? And on this show, on Esoteric Beat, I'm really interested in the boundaries of academic scholarship on esotericism, like to the degree that that can be useful to, say, a practitioner. This could be a practitioner of, I don't know, lucid dreaming. We're talking about in terms of dream
right.
punk, necessarily have to be like a magical practitioner, right? So, can you say more about like dreaming? You write about dreaming on the site, on the I know the Facebook group where you do a dream punk kind of club, right? And you
Mhm.
often ask questions about like people's dreams. Tell me more about how dreaming comes into it.
Oh boy. Well, it's really up to the individual writer, how they want to incorporate dreaming. But it, like I said, the main thing, as far as I'm concerned, to make something a dream punk story is that it has to have something to do with alternate mental states and alternate mental worlds, kind of. And so a lot of times that is a dream. That is something to do with lucid dreaming or dream technology. But aside from that, though, personally, I will incorporate a lot of my actual dreams into stuff, like kind of get that for ideas. And I want something to have a dreamlike feel to it a lot of times. So even if it didn't literally come from a dream, it's like this is the sort of thing that feels like a dream, you know?
Like,
And
what does dreaming teach us
yeah,
about like consciousness? Like, we talk about daydreaming, so like there's this weird permeable boundary, right? Like, dreaming is often this liminal state, and it doesn't necessarily get contained by one or more particular, like, it doesn't have to be awake, doesn't have to be asleep. I think about how Philip K. Dick got so much mileage out of the hypnagogic and hypnopompic states, right? Like on your
yeah.
way to falling asleep, on your way to waking up, kind of writing stuff down out of that, looking at the kind of creations of the mind, um, out of that. So yeah, this is really neat stuff, and so that's why I wanted to have you come on the show, because I think that you're sort of tuned into a lot of the things that we're interested in and value here.
That's
So
cool.
tell me about your first novel.
Well, that's a little bit complicated, but so my first novel is the one that's you call it a work in progress, basically. But it's I think it's set, it's ready to be, shopped around and published and all that. That's the first full length novel that's just me. My first novella is this one. You want to know about that one,
Yeah,
Drek?
that's what I was thinking of. I was
Okay.
thinking of
No, just a
Direct, which
little
is
short novel. Yeah.
just, I just gotta say, like, great title. It kind of reminds me of the way the band The Jesus Lizard has a bunch of like four-letter words for all of their album titles. It has a kind of
Yeah.
punch to it.
Yeah, I liked it. And the thing is, for me, I think I didn't even realize it that much at the time, but a lot of this was inspired by Jeff Noon's Vert, and so he's got that punchy short name like that. And not even, Drek is like, it's a real word, but it's not in that common of usage. And so a lot of people will hear it and not even, think it's like a made up word even. Um, but uh, but yeah, but one thing that's really cool is Jeff Noon. I interviewed him for the Dream Punk stuff, and he's just like a really nice, approachable guy. And when before this thing even went out to the publisher, I sent it to him because I was very presumptuous, I guess. And and so I didn't even get a publisher set for it until like a year after Jeff Noon had already read my PDF and written a nice little blurb on it. And we wound up using that on the cover of the thing. So a brilliant exploration of technology, strange new borderlands is what they put on the cover. And so we just so I loved hearing that because I was inspired by his work a lot for this, I think. And of course, also inspired by PKD. That's been the main inspiration the whole time. Um, but yeah, it just like I would say for this one similar kind of similar in substance, not so much style. I think a PKD book would be Eye in the Sky. I feel like Eye in the Sky to me has like a real, I don't know, 50s kind of feel to it. It has like a real, and I mean it's like everything's a product of its time and stuff, but still it has a more of a I don't know, but Drek to me is more like it's like very near future cyberpunk sort of like Mr. Robot kind of stuff, where it's like this could be present day pretty much. It's just kind of it plays with technology, but oh yeah, like Black Mirror, that kind of a lot of times Black Mirror is that way. Um, but similar to Eye in the Sky, there's like different phases to it. There's different parts where you're sort of following different people as the main character. And anyway, it's a weird one, So there's basically like three major parts to it, and those are sort of like three different stories, but they're just it's sort of cyclical. It connects up. Hey, I'm not hearing you all of a sudden.
I
Um,
muted it because of the stupid dog was barking.
Here, one
Uh,
sec. Sorry.
Now, can you hear me?
Let me hear.
You
All
should
right.
hear me now.
Yeah, I just unplugged my headphones. So can you hear
No,
me?
no, what happened was I muted because my dog was barking.
Oh, okay, okay.
That's my bad. So I was going to say about Eye in the Sky. They talk about Eye in the Sky. I consider it to be like the paradigmatic PKD multiple perspective novel, right? Where he's doing this kind of almost stream of consciousness sort of thing, right? Where he's looking for multiple perspectives, and he's interested in how people have their own what he calls an idios cosmos, right? We all have our own sort of we live in our own kind of private world, and that's one way of talking about these boundaries that the literature is kind of trying to get us to, like, think outside of that, right? You want to tell me anything about the plot of Drek, what you learned from publishing your first novella?
Okay. It's kind of funny. I was following the Philip K. Dick playbook a little bit on this because I remember there was when he had some success. I think it might have been with Man in the High Castle. He had a little bit of success there. He got the award, and then he's like, I got to strike while the iron's hot. I got to put stuff out. And so really for me, it was the success was my first published fiction work, which was Mirror Maze, and this one, I don't really consider it a novel so much. It's just a collection. It's more like a short story collection. The follow-up to it is sort of a hybrid. The follow-up to it, Somniscope, is actually like all of the stories occur in a set order, and there's bits between the stories that connect everything. So it's sort of like this really disjointed single narrative that has different layers to it and stuff. So that one's kind of like a hybrid novel with multiple authors. But anyway, but yeah, this was the first work, and when I got this published, when I was done with it, I was like, I've got two-thirds of a novella, and I need to finish that up and get it out, and strike while the iron's hot, and it worked. It worked that I was able to finish the thing and get it to the same publisher was interested, in Drek. And so, yeah, meanwhile, though, I had started writing The Lasting Lands, which is my big fantasy novel that started everything. I started The Lasting Lands about 10 years ago, you know, and I was posting that the first the first third of what turned out to be the full novel. The first third was probably about as long as Drek here. And I posted that to Wattpad way back when, and I was able to win a Waddy Award in 2015. And so that was my big validation, like, all right, this can work, this can work. Um, you know, and but anyway, then I kind of put that on hold some, and so I wound up writing another basically novella length part to it, and then some more too. And so I had like more than two-thirds of a novel, The Lasting Lands, that was all done basically by the time I even started writing Mirror Maze. But actually that's not entirely true, because Mirror Maze consists of a lot of short stories, and I had most of my short stories done already. But that was not the biggest part of the work. The biggest part was taking everybody else's stories and going through those and doing like I have a heavy editing hand, and so and so with people's stories, I didn't just be like, oh, that's good, and put it out there. It's like I wanted stuff to be a certain way, and so there was some back and forth and stuff, and so I was very thankful that people that I was working with were okay with that, because I know that can be a lot, um, but yeah, so I think I got really sidetracked. What were you asking about here? You're muted again, by the way. I think you're done.
Let me just comment real quick. You know, I'm really interested in the kind of ambition you have here. That it's a collaborative project, right? Bringing together all these different authors, but at the same time, you have this vision, you know, and that you're like you said, you have a heavy hand in the editing and kind of getting everything to sort of come together in this like meta story. What do you think of the idea? One more Philip K. Dick thing, and then I'll let you get back to your stuff. You know, Dick talked about all of his books as one big meta novel that we're all sort of in a way kind of doing the same thing. I mean, I
Yeah.
wonder if that's like all a kind of a dream punk project, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I that totally resonates with me a lot. And I don't see it as like he planned to write something that connects. It's just a sort of like this is where your brain takes you. And especially when you're following like your subconscious a lot with the, the half asleep, half awake kind of states is where you get a lot of ideas and you write stuff down directly from that, because I've definitely done that too. I've used that kind of, I mean, actually when I picked out the section from the lasting lands that I want to read. I was doing that last night in bed. I was just like laying in bed half asleep. And then I had to like go turn on my phone and mark down what I was going to read, because I was going through it while I was half asleep. Um, and that's actually where the idea for turning this into like an actual maze, I had the name first, Mirror Maze, sort of a play off Mirror Shades, because I just thought it fit with the whole the feel of dream punk. It's like a mirror, like you're reflecting, you're looking into yourself, and it's a maze. You're going, it's hard to find, so basically mirror maze packed into that word is the idea that you're locked inside your own head trying to find your way through and make sense of everything that's in there. um
And if
but
anybody's not catching the reference, Mirror Shades was the OG seminal cyberpunk anthology with people like John Shirley and Rudy
yeah,
Rucker and William Gibson and Bruce Sterling, all those guys.
yeah, I'm pretty sure it was the first because it said, the cyberpunk anthology, and I didn't quite do that with Mirror Maze. I said a dream punk anthology. So I was being a little bit more allowing for others, you know. But anyway, uh but oh yeah, yeah. So about that having everything connect though, I can definitely see that because that brings me to talking about Drek because the first third of this started off as a short story that I was writing that was sort of a really misguided entry into a contest on Wattpad that had to do with fairy tale retellings, and I loosely interpreted fairy tale as like, Faust is a fairy tale. You know what I mean? And so I was doing a retelling of Faust, which just right from the start, that wasn't going to win the contest. I mean, it wasn't going to like be in the book. The actual book of fairy tale retellings, when it finally came out, it had like a red high heel on the cover, and it was all like it was a very different feel than what I came up with. Because what I came up with was like this this perpetual student that has to stay in school because he wants to avoid debt. He wants to avoid paying back the debt, which is like something I know a little too well. It's like, oh, well, student loans are due. I guess I should go to grad school because then I can put off student loans a while longer. Anyway, so I have a character sort of like that. That's like a wannabe like hacktivist type, and he's basically he's tempted and sells his soul for power, for like access, for like being able to access all this information to let him do things he shouldn't be doing and have extra power and stuff. And so it's sort of like that first part especially is a Faustian bargain kind of a story. And but the resolution of that story, it's not it's again, it's a lot like a lot of PKD books are. The resolution of that story makes you just feel like, huh, it's not like a, oh, he defeated the bad guy kind of ending. It's a real just like, man, that's and so but I wound up doing another story that was centered on a different type of technology, like a vision sort of thing. The other story is called Second Sight, and it was about these lenses that you can put in, and it just enhances your vision, and things kind of get really weird from there. But But basically, when I was writing that story, and especially when I was done and I looked at it, I was like, this is the same type of story. This is a Faustian bargain type story dealing with technology and the trade-offs and losing privacy and all this kind of stuff. And I was looking at it and I was like, there's even parallels with the characters. And I was reanalyzing the two stories and making adjustments. And I wound up renaming the characters to where it's the same characters in both stories, but they're just living in different worlds, different lives going on. And so then I had to, I had my work cut out for me to turn that into a cohesive novella where it's like make a third part that explains where these first two parts come from. Like why do you have these two parallel worlds telling similar stories but not the same story? So the third part sort of connects everything together, you know. But yeah, so anyway, that does connect back to what you were saying about PKD having his stories sort of feel like they're all in the same universe. Maybe it's like, yeah, I was writing short stories and being like, no, these are the same story, so I definitely know where that comes from. And even in something that feels really disconnected, like The Lasting Lands is on the face of it, it's sort of like a portal fantasy type thing, like along the lines of Alice in Wonderland or Wizard of Oz. On the face of it, it's kind of like that. But then when you get into it, it's got a lot of more technology than those things. There's like most of it takes place on Mars, and but it's like a weird fantastical sort of Mars, and there's definitely some cosmic horror type stuff with like a big, very powerful floating space jellyfish thing. There's definitely some weird stuff that goes into there. But yeah, so that stuff, even though it looks sort of like fantasy, and this looks like some cyberpunk, there's a lot of similarities. I'm definitely exploring the same themes in
It
these different
strikes
books.
me that, you mentioned cosmic horror. It strikes me that Lovecraft was very interested in sleep, right? One of my favorites of his was Beyond the Wall of Sleep. And there's this kind of like unreliable narrator thing throughout his works where all of his works are kind of connected by this theme of cosmic horror, of the idea that these elder gods, if we were to understand their nature, we would be driven insane. And we're
Yeah.
looking at reports from people that are coming out of this dreamlike state of madness. So I could even see an argument for Lovecraft as a kind of proto dream punk author, right? Because of the boundary disillusion, the going beyond the boundaries of sleep, or the wall of sleep, right? This liminality. So in terms of like our time management, I'm thinking since Zoom's going to kick us out of the meeting, let's finish our like discussion in 5 or 10, and then we'll go to the second meeting to do the reading. So let's talk a little bit about Alice in Wonderland.
Right.
Um, because you've mentioned Alice in Wonderland as kind of a benchmark, right? And I wanted to share, my experience of Alice in Wonderland when I was a kid. Loved the movie. I remember the Disney movie. I remember there's like a corny, like made for TV movie that was all celebrity studded that I got into, and I remember finding through the Looking Glass movie like very kind of scary and disturbing, right? But when I got to college, and I went and actually read the book, Alice in Wonderland, and I remember I had this friend on the internet who was like this weird, like mystical, like alchemy and Plato's Symposium kind of a guy, and he hinted at the occult leanings of Lewis Carroll, and I
Mhm.
started reading. Okay, yeah, we got 10 minutes. I started reading Alice in Wonderland in a similar way that I read Philip K. Dick stories, or like Robert Anton Wilson's Illuminatus trilogy, like certain kind of books like that are pretty special and hit me in this way, um, where it becomes a kind of like allegory for altered states of consciousness. I also think of James Joyce.
Yeah.
Like as I'm reading it, the book sort of like triggers altered states of consciousness, or it seems to be like an allegory of like what's going on in my head. So for example, the Mad Tea Party, the whole
Mhm.
like clean cup move down thing, like this is like a description of like what's going on kind of like in my head as I have like certain kind of mystical or visionary experiences. And then I feel like the book is sort of like commenting on
Mhm.
these experiences that I then, have triggered. And so, when you read Lovecraft or PKD, do you feel like there's kind of a like, are you getting high by reading this book? Like, is it putting you into a dreamlike state? Is it actually triggering an altered state of consciousness, or is it just sort of like about altered states of consciousness? Do you see the distinction?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question though. It reminds me earlier I was thinking about this. I forget who said it, but basically I really like the idea that when you're writing fiction, it's a controlled dream state where you're going through a dream, but you're holding back the pace and you're doing it slow enough that you can write down what's happening. You know what I mean? So a lot of what comes out when you're writing fiction, it's not exactly the same thing as just making up stuff. That would be really clunky if you make up this happens, then that happens, and that happens. You might do an outline like that, but when you're actually like in the scene and you're letting it flow through, that's like you're going into a dream state. When you're doing that, you're just staying conscious while you do it. And the flip side of that is when people are reading, that's a really similar thing too. They're taking your recorded dream state and they're making it their own dream state. And so that right there is what a lot of dream punk stuff is about. That's like the whole plot of the Somniscope. I was saying is that like there's a machine where people record their dream states and you put it on and you wear it and you live through their recorded dream states. But of course, it's going to be filtered through your own consciousness, so it's going to be a little different from how it was originally recorded because it's your own experience. You know, and so that whole thing that works great for like a metaphor for the whole reading and writing process. Dreaming it definitely connects up. Um,
Like, would we value this stuff if it was created entirely using like reason? I mean, even like imagination, if we're thinking of imagination in terms of like the way that the mathematician like visualizes lines and
yeah,
fields, or matrices or whatever.
yeah.
If it's too mechanical, right? Like, would we value it if it wasn't, let's say, dreamed into being?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a place for nonfiction, for logical kind of like essays and that sort of stuff. But when it comes to fiction where you're experiencing it and living it, I feel like, yeah, I definitely prefer like my sci-fi on the soft side. I'm definitely more into soft SF than the hard stuff that's more like about the actual scientific ideas and their plausibility and all that. It's like, I don't know, I could watch some documentaries or read some nonfiction stuff if I was into that. I'm more into I want a weird experience. And so it's not that important if the science is accurate, really, in that kind of situation. But yeah, you mentioned Lovecraft. He's definitely somebody that's an influence on, with uh, the out there kind of horrific kind of stuff, which, PKD has a lot of that too in his stuff. And also another one that comes to mind is Lord Dunsany
Mm.
is, yeah, like he was influential on Tolkien and on Ursula Le Guin, and lots of people that are just in that whole. You think of them as like classic fantasy. It's like, yeah, Lord Dunsany was one of the early big influences, and his stuff it just puts me in a certain mood, a certain state of mind where you're just like it makes you feel like all this stuff can actually be real in some sense. So before I really dove into all this, for the purposes of doing research for writing, I felt like I had to be real scientific about, spelling out how would a portal to Mars, how would that work? I had to be real logical about like, okay, time's going to pass because it doesn't make sense they could just jump right there. And but then the more I went on with the stuff, it's like no, we don't really know anything. And so it's like you can't even take it for granted that the whole universe is real. You know what I mean? It's just a matter of like so as far as like what do we know about the existence of like elves and fairies and other realms and stuff like that? It's like, well, we don't really know. So it's not all just necessarily just fantasy. It's like, it can feel real because it's like we really don't know.
But one thing that struck me is that, I mean, I think about like trips I've had where I'm like, now I value sobriety in a way that I didn't value before. I was like
Yeah.
so tripped out that I was like wishing I could be sober. And kind of like one of the things about our rational faculties is like, okay, now this object has been dreamed into being, but it's like the rational faculties that help us understand like what's so weird about it,
Mhm.
right? So another thing about Alice in Wonderland that I thought was really cool that I learned kind of in grad school was it turns out that Carol like had a bone to pick with the new math, like stuff like imaginary numbers and whatever.
Really?
And
Yeah.
apparently, like some of the stuff in Alice in Wonderland is like it's not actually intended as like a dream punk allegory of altered states of consciousness. It's like actually him with like this axe to grind. This is the argument of certain, interpreters now. It's like his axe to grind because he was a mathematician in his, day job. His axe to grind about this like new math stuff. And it turns out that he was kind of like part of this old guard. He was like too conservative, and it turns out that he was wrong about that. Right. So it could be that the Mad Tea Party is like he's like parodying the like activity of an algorithm.
But the thing is, like whatever his inspiration for that, it's like what comes out is this imagery that sticks with you and resonates in a weird way. And it's, so it's like that's how the audience experiences it. And so even if they don't connect with his motivation for it, even if that, if that was, it's like, yeah, you get this weird dreamy stuff out of it.
It takes on a life of its own beyond the intentions of the author. I guess the intentions of the author are another one of those boundaries that we can kind of call into question in this process. So couple minutes left. Any last things you want to say if people want to get involved with Drepunk, if they want to, submit to your next anthology, how can they find you?
Well, if you go to cliffjonesjr.com, so cliffjonesjr.com on there, then that's where I'll update my stuff and I mean, I'm on different social media, but those things, those systems, I don't know. I got off of Twitter back with, a while back, and who knows, I might get off of Facebook at some time, anyway, so you can always go to cliffjonesjr.com, or just search for me. Oh yeah, if you search for Dream Punk, I'm coming up in there. So that's part of the idea, is that I was using a term that a lot of people weren't using. And so if you can search for it and find me. But yeah, if I don't know if I'm going to be doing any collections like this for quite a while, because that's a whole lot, and I have my own stuff I'm trying to do too. Obviously, like I still haven't got my first full-length novel out there yet, and it's been a while. So, but yeah, we'll see.
And you've got your dad duties and everything. We all have busy lives.
Yeah,
Well,
and I just
great.
bookshelf. I'm doing stuff like that now.
Oh, you made that.
Yeah, because we just recently, we're still moving into my dad recently passed away, and we're moved into his house now. We're trying, and I'm like kind of setting things up. I just painted the room and built in some bookshelves and stuff. So
Awesome. Looks great.
thanks.
Well, cool. So we are gonna break now, and I think it's gonna be like 10 minutes before Zoom lets us back on. So I'm gonna go let my dogs out and get the dinner heating up or whatever, and I'll send you another Zoom link in just a few.
All right.
All right, stay tuned for part two. Thanks very much, Cliff.
All right.